Good morning. My name is John, and we're here with Luke chapter 12. We've been in this series from the Gospel of Luke and just on the road with Jesus to Jerusalem. And Luke has promised to, from the first chapter, to try to bring meaning, sense out of all that happened and to show with certainty that it really happened and how it happened. And in his writing, he ends up showing a lot of surprises. And so we're surprised by the things that Jesus said and the way that he said them, the metaphors that he uses, the parables of teaching. And we've even talked about the fact that he seems to be talking in codes. And yet we said the codes that he uses, while they're sometimes hard and difficult for us to understand exactly, for the people in his culture at his time, the codes were there for everybody. And so Jesus, in all of his teaching and in all of his miracles and activities, is always making it evident that everyone is invited, everyone is included, everyone is able to be one of his disciples. And so Luke sets up this chapter 12 a little bit differently from the previous chapters, which have gone from story to story to story in different places and with different people, and a lot of interaction between Jesus and different individuals. And in chapter 12, we have the multitude, a large multitude, a significantly large group of people. And we can imagine the pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. They're coming from all the towns and regions. Just a few years ago, Lisa and I had the privilege, the opportunity to walk as pilgrims on the Camino de Santiago, the way of St. James across northern Spain. And we experienced a little bit of people spread out along the pathway. And then at certain places where maybe there was an ice cream or something to drink or a little bit of shade, different days, some fruit trees or a spectacle of some sort, people would group together. There would be a gathering. That would be illegal now in these times of the coronavirus. But in a pilgrimage, that's what happened. And the people group together, and there's Jesus. And he's taking advantage to teach. And in chapter 12, Jesus is teaching almost the entire time. And so he begins with a surprising statement, because he says, watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. And so what is yeast? What's this little tiny ingredient that's almost invisible that you put in the bread dough and it kind of works through, it impacts and affects everything. But starting out, it's little, it's hard to detect. And you almost don't even notice it. And so Jesus is saying that the hypocrisy, that the teaching is not the obvious false teaching. The things, often in life, our choices are not between right and wrong, but the difficult choices in life are between good and good and better, or bad and not so bad. And they're very slight differences, but they're tiny seeds that come in like yeast. And these ideas, small ideas, can send us off in a different direction. And Jesus says, watch out for that in the teaching, because there's a lot of hypocrisy. And little things are little gossips, little things that would make us judge others, and little lies and half-truths. And he says, watch out for that. And it's interesting to me that Jesus doesn't make a list of all the wrong things that have been taught, simply speaks in general. And then Jesus points us in the right way. Don't spend your time combating bad ideas and people's hypocrisy. Just live life the right way and point people towards God and his love. And so that's what Jesus is doing. And he says, don't live in fear. Verse 4 and 5. And don't live in fear of the people who can do damage to your body. And he uses the metaphor of death and ending up just tossed out on the trash heap of death and Gehenna. And here in my version says into hell, the burning trash pits outside the city. He says, don't be afraid of what people are thinking, people in power. Don't be so focused on the temporal things. Think of life in terms of a more eternal perspective. And he says, but just in case you're thinking I'm telling you to be afraid of God, I'm telling you to have reverence for God, respect and reverence, because the eternal is so much greater than the temporal. The spiritual is more important than the material. But you don't have to be afraid of God, and that's where he goes in verse 6 and 7, that think of the little tiny sparrows, the smallest birds. God cares for them. He knows all about you. You don't have to be in fear of God. Rather, you need to have God in your perspective and be respecting him. And so all that God is asking you is to do justice, we've said in a previous chapter, to love mercy and to walk humbly. And so here, be honest, be open, don't be a hypocrite. And when you have to speak before people, you're in difficult situations. He says when you're brought before rulers and authorities, don't think about how to defend yourself. He's not saying just make it up on the spot. Jesus is saying just be yourself with humility and transparency. Speak the truth in love. And so here's where we have the interaction in verse 13 that Luke uses as sort of the pivot point for all of the chapter. A voice from the multitude says to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. And so that's a normal question that you could ask at that time of a rabbi, of a leader, and they would expect a wise, practical bit of advice or counsel that would orient these men about the right decision to make. But Jesus surprises again because he says, hey, that's not my choice to make. Who made me the judge over you? Actually, the problem is much deeper than how you divide the inheritance, and the solution is much broader, much wider. Later, Paul is going to say that the love of God goes to the deepest depths and to the widest parts. There's nowhere that the love of God can't go. And Jesus is saying, broaden your perspective, widen your perspective to see that really the issue is not whether or not your brother divides the inheritance the right way. The real issue in your heart is greed or generosity. It's what is the purpose and the project of your life? And so that's the topic of this entire chapter. Hypocrisy or honesty, fear or trust, greed or generosity. And so then Jesus tells them a parable, a story of a man who accumulated so many things for himself, and when he had enough, he decided to accumulate more. And so he started over just building on what he had to have more and more. And Jesus said that is foolish. Now, he didn't say it's foolish to accumulate. He said it's foolish to accumulate for yourself, for no purpose, for no reason, just for your own personal security. And so accumulate to help, to serve, to build, to be generous, to live for a greater purpose. And then he says, if you're doing that, you don't have to worry. This whole famous section about don't worry about what you'll eat or you'll drink or you'll wear. Jesus isn't saying we don't have to plan. No, he gave us common sense. He has common sense. He's on his way to Jerusalem. He already is planning what's coming in the days ahead. But he's saying don't live with the anxiety, with like a false sense of worry, and also a false sense of security that if I just had a little more stuff, a little more money, then I would be peaceful because I would be secure. And he says all of this is temporal. It can so easily pass away. Trust God. God is the one ultimately in charge of all these processes, and we can have great trust in him. Our focus is to be on God and what he's doing. And that's a surprising teaching that Jesus is putting out there for the whole multitude. He says in verse 34, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so what Jesus is saying is the most important thing in life is not our treasure, it's where our heart is focused. And so be watchful, be ready. He says, he's talking about how we should live our lives. And that's why Luke used a story of the guy said, how do we divide our inheritance? And he's focused on his life and his purpose and his resources. And now Jesus is saying, how should you live your life? You should live your life like a servant who's been put in charge and the master's coming and you don't know when the master's coming. And so be ready, be diligent, be hardworking, be responsible for the things that have been entrusted to you. You should have the mentality of a steward, of an administrator. And so he says the Lord may return at any time. Is it a trick? Is it supposed to be a giant surprise? No, Jesus says it's just we don't know. And later Peter is going to say that God really keeps this world going so that more and more people can have an opportunity to follow him and to live well and to love well. And Jesus says everybody has an opportunity to be a good steward of their resources and to get ready. And in verse 48, he finishes saying, "From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked." In one of our groups this week, we reflected on the question whether or not God has expectations of us. And what are expectations? And so we were learning that expectations, to be valid, should be spoken, they should be agreed upon, they should be realistic, they should be something that we can accomplish. And so God, if he has expectations, it's not to trap us or to trick us or to judge us. His expectations would be of something that we've agreed to and we've assumed a role. We said, hey, I want to follow Christ. I want to live with generosity. And so if we've made that commitment, then God would have that expectation that we'll do our part. He's faithful. He will do his part. But if he's given us privileges and we've said, I want to live for God, then he expects us to follow through. And so Jesus says, yeah, live your life well. And don't fear God, love God. But he says something else completely surprising as he's finishing the chapter. He says, I've come to bring fire on the earth. And it's a new metaphor. Now, fire is a good thing. It brings warmth on a cold night. And a fire does so much for us, but it's also a dangerous thing. And fire can burn. And Jesus came to bring love and peace, right? And make everybody happy. Isn't that what Jesus is supposed to do? And Jesus surprises the multitude and he says, people who follow me may find that it brings actually division. Not everybody wants an honest person around them. Not everybody wants to be part of a hardworking group of people, transparent, authentic, generous. And so some people are going to have a problem with that, and that's going to create division. In fact, it might turn a father against a son or a son against a father. And some of us have experienced that. Now, we know that in God's greatest plan, Jesus said, I have come to bring reconciliation and to show you the way to peace. But he's saying also in the practical experience of our lives, we will find that not everyone will agree with us. And so there will be division. But he tells the people as he closes this section, he says to the crowd, when you see a cloud rising in the west, then you worry about the weather, and you know how to discern the times of the politics and the economics and the social situations and the things. And he says, what I really want you to do is don't be a hypocrite. Focus on the things of God. Don't spend your intellectual energies just thinking about pretending to be wise about this world. It's okay to know about and to discuss and to debate, but the really important things is the state of our heart. What kind of person are we? And so this whole section is about changing our perspective, changing our paradigm. That's the Gospel of Luke. And having less concern for the temporal, more concern for the eternal. Less concern for our appearance and more concern for being transparent. Less concern for diplomacy and more concern for honesty. Less concern for security and a greater concern and focus on serving others. So as we study Luke, as we reflect on the words of Jesus and the meaning for our life today, let's do our best to be faithful, to show mercy, and to live with love for others. God bless you.